So here on Martin Luther King weekend, we are coming to you live from Hayneville, Alabama, and the John Myrick Daniels Monument here in downtown Hayneville on our way to Selma. We have a special program for you this week. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Making Waves. We are recording this over the Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, and as such, we have a very special program for you. We have a pre-recorded segment that was filmed live in Selma, Alabama earlier this weekend. We think you'll find it very interesting and informative. We will also be talking to a friend of mine, Sabrina Davis, about a tragedy that she and her family are currently living through, and it has to do with the existence of a Florida statute. It's known as the free kill law, and we will be discussing that with Sabrina later on in the program. We will also be discussing bills that have already made it to the floor of the Florida House and have successfully passed the House. So this and a whole lot more coming up on Making Waves. But without further ado, let me take you to a trip that we took earlier this weekend to the heart of rural Alabama and that cradle of civil rights, the home of the civil rights movement, Selma, Alabama.
We all carry the cross and speak what we're taught.
So, you know, it's funny, one of my favorite movies is Young Guns, and there's a quote that Billy the Kid does in Young Guns, and he says, you know, because he's fighting injustice, and he tells the bad guys, he says, I'll make you famous. And it's funny because we're coming to you from Hayneville, Alabama, and I bet nobody even knows this town exists, and I bet nobody even knows the history of Hayneville. We just drove up here to the city hall because of an event and a memorial that we wanted to see. And right beside the city hall or the courthouse, you have a sign like this. And I didn't even know this happened here. So, make you famous. I think Hayneville, Alabama should be famous. I think people should be made to learn things like this and to learn how far we've come in 60 years. Can you believe it was just 60 years ago? But like I said, we're coming to you live from the heart of the Black Belt in Alabama, a town called Hayneville, Alabama. We're on our way up to Selma. Next stop will be on Highway 80. So now we're going to tell you the story of Viola Liuzzo, a white civil rights activist who came down to Selma to help Dr. Martin Luther King in his efforts to improve voter registration down here in Alabama's Black Belt. So we're here on Highway 80. We're here on the path between Selma and Montgomery. This is where the famous march took place in 1965. And Viola Liuzzo, she was in Montgomery, Alabama, on her last day on earth. She was there listening to Dr. King's famous speech in Montgomery, Alabama, on the steps of the Capitol there in Montgomery, Alabama. She was driving members of the party back to Selma on this road when someone pulled up alongside of them and shot her point blank through her car, and she died. And we're here visiting a marker to her and in her memory. So let's go take a look. Let's take a look at the memorial, and here you see some signs that have been set up. You might recognize some of those names. But let's take a look at the memorial up here.
have some of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, quotes. This is an important one to remember. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. What are you writing, Joel?
So you can add your commentary or your wishes to the sign here at the Lowndes County Interpretive Center. Just something that I always said when I was on the campaign trail. Freedom is always worth fighting for.
That's a good one.
So Sophie's looking at an interesting display right here. It's a sample literacy test with sample questions that were used in states. And again, how many of you could answer all 4 of those questions? And again, remember you had 4 pages of questions, and the questions could be just very arbitrary. And how'd you do, Soph?
I think 3 out of 4.
Okay.
Don't know how many bubbles in a bar soap.
Yeah. And this tells it all right here. How many of the 5,000 blacks in Lowndes County were registered to vote in 1965? 0. Yeah, it's a very informative museum, and it's run by your National Park Service here on Highway 80. Again, if you're ever driving through on your way to Montgomery, Alabama from Mississippi or vice versa, definitely worth a stop. So we're now in a field that used to actually be a tent city back in the day, because once African Americans did register to vote, a lot of times the sharecroppers were kicked off the land they were working, the land they were living on, and they were told to move. So at any given time, you had a tent city that was full of anywhere from, 10 to 20 families that were living in this field. And Sophie, I wanted to make a comment as we are leaving the Bloody Lowndes Interpretive Center behind us there. I noticed that in the National Park Service facility, there's a definite leftist twinge in there. Like they have souvenirs with Barack Obama on them and things of that nature. And I want to make it clear that as a card-carrying Republican, as someone who was considered the second most conservative member of the Florida legislature, we need to be sure that as Republicans that we don't ever give away any of our history or any of our territory. I mean, this is just as much Republican history as it is anybody's history. Remember, the people who were bad in Alabama, George Wallace, Bull Connor, they were Democrats, not Republicans. So again, as a Republican, I'm very proud to come to this facility. And like I said, I don't ever want places like this to be turned into monuments to one party or another. We're all Americans. We all played a vital role in making the changes that occurred here. And that's just all I'm going to say about that. I was a little bit disappointed that, in my opinion, as soon as I get to the gift shop, it looks like there was kind of a political leaning here. But other than that, a very emotional visit here to the Lowndes County Interpretive Center. Like I said, in a county that was once known as Bloody Lowndes. We're at the site of Bloody Sunday, where marchers came over the Edmund Pettus Bridge and were met by the authorities. March 7th, 1965. So we're getting close. What we're looking for is right over that hill. This is the final stop on our trip today. The Edmund Pettus Bridge here in Selma, Alabama, the site of Bloody Sunday. Sophie and I and the dogs, we have walked in Dr. King's footsteps. today. We've walked in the footsteps of many great civil rights leaders. We've seen the church here in Selma, where the march from Selma to Montgomery began. It's been an enlightening day, and I can't think of anywhere better to be on the weekend that we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday.
So that was a very, very emotional and moving experience to travel to Selma, Alabama. I grew up just the next state over in Mississippi, and my whole life I've never been to that part of Alabama. So that was a bucket list item to walk the Edmund Pettus Bridge with my wife and my 2 dogs. That will be a memory that I'll cherish forever. So I hope you enjoyed that. But, there are still some civil rights cases going on in the present day. Imagine, if you will, living amongst Floridians who have a certain amount of rights under the law, and these are rights that you yourself do not have. We're going to be speaking to a friend of mine named Sabrina Davis, who finds herself in just such a situation. Can you imagine how frustrating it must be to have other people's lives valued at a higher level than your own, or in some cases to be told that your loved ones' lives do not have worth in a Florida court of law? For more information on this matter, let's listen to Sabrina Davis as she tells her tragic story. So I'd like to welcome to our show today a very good friend of mine and just a remarkable woman, Sabrina Davis. Sabrina, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on today.
So Sabrina, listen, I want to jump right into it. Obviously, I know your story. I know your situation. We've known each other for a couple years now. But, our viewers out there, this may be all new to them. And I want to warn our viewers at home that this is going to be a graphic story. This is the kind of story that you wouldn't want to have happen to your wife or to your husband or to your mom or dad or child. But yet this has been Sabrina's nightmare now for several years. So Sabrina, if you don't mind, take as much time as you need to tell everyone out there the story of your father, Keith Davis.
Thank you. My dad, Keith Davis, a Navy veteran, a very independent person, 62 years old. He woke up with knee pain on a Saturday, typical day. I helped him get to the emergency room in Brandon, Florida. When he arrived, he had pain in his leg, swelling, redness. It was hot to the touch. I actually have a photo of his leg. This is his ankle and foot area, and this is up his leg.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really bad. We did not know exactly what was going on. We had our suspicions. We weren't sure. So going through the ER process, we did ask if they would order an ultrasound because my dad had a history of blood clots, which they declined to order that test. They stated directly to me, this is not a blood clot. So my dad ends up getting admitted. It says bed rest on the board in the hospital room, like those little boards that they put the date and time and the nurse and all that. My dad was ordered to be on bed rest. And so after 5 days, my dad was due to get out on Thursday, and he was not getting better, but he was awake, alert. We had plans. And 19 minutes after we spoke, I get a call telling me that my dad is code blue. He's not breathing and has no pulse. And what do they want me to do? And I was certain they had the wrong patient. Like, I didn't even believe it at first. But it turns out that it was my dad, and no form of resuscitation helped. So he died, and the doctor who admitted him, his primary care physician of over 2 years right there in Brandon, Florida, told me he was planning to put cardiac arrest on the death certificate. And I said, there's no way you go in for knee pain and come out dead and put cardiac arrest. Like, I did not believe it. Nothing about me believed that. So I asked him to do an autopsy, and he said he's never done one. He's been practicing over 40 years and that he doesn't do autopsies. So I hired an independent person to do one, and they said it was revealed that a 9-inch long blood clot was in my dad's left leg, and it traveled to his chest, causing a massive saddle pulmonary thromboembolism. And that's what killed him. So very preventable. And we knew what it was. No one listened. I feel like it was a conscious disregard for my dad's life. And at that moment, I knew someone had to be held accountable.
Wow. And so, Sabrina, What transpires after that? I assume you probably sought counsel, or maybe talked to the hospital or something, maybe even talked to the doctor himself.
For sure. So I did speak to several people, and the hospital's insurance company called asking me, was my dad married or did I live with him? And I didn't really understand why they were asking me this. I was crying. I said, what does this have to do with anything? I never answered the woman, and I never heard from her again either. Later, I tried to contact attorneys and found out about this Florida only law. I filed with the Florida Department of Health, and they found that the doctor worked below the standard of care and committed medical malpractice. And I also filed with ACA, the Agency for Healthcare Administration, that found the hospital did not follow DVT protocols.
Wow. So this is just, I mean, Sabrina, obviously I've heard the story before, but to hear it again from scratch and to have you walk us through it, I mean, this is just unbelievable that something like this could happen. Did you ever hear from the physician himself? Did he ever say he was sorry? Did he ever say, like, what was going to come of this, or why he didn't order the ultrasound to begin with? I mean, not to second guess, but boy, it sure did sound like an open and shut kind of situation where an ultrasound probably would have saved your dad's life.
It would have. In fact, the autopsy doctor put that in the autopsy report. Had they ordered the ultrasound and prescribed blood thinners, anticoagulation, then my dad could have had a different outcome. I did talk to the doctor after this happened, and I told him, obviously, I was in this state of mind of disbelief. It was traumatizing, and I really, like, it's hard to explain when you're in that state exactly what state you're in. But I told him that this was preventable, and if I can do anything about this, I was going to have someone held accountable, and I actually hung up on him. Now, a short time later, I started requesting medical records, and his staff hung up on me. He actually called me back to apologize on behalf of his staff's behavior. And I said, listen, I am my dad's only child. I am the administrator of estate, the personal representative, the probate person. Like, what else do you need from me? I want his records. He authorized them to be released. So that was probably a few months after my dad died. So we didn't ever specifically talk about my dad's death, but initially after my dad died, our first conversation, I told him I would see if I could have someone held accountable for this, and I hung up on him. And that was it until later.
So just to be clear, Sabrina, is this 10 years ago? Is this what year was this?
This was October 15th of 2020 that my dad died.
Oh my word. And so, just to be sure that the viewers out there understand why we brought you on the show, I'm sure right now, Sabrina, people are thinking, well, boy, this is going to have something to do with malpractice or getting rid of bad doctors, when really, guys, this is a human rights episode that we're talking about. And we're going to talk about Sabrina's rights and her father's rights under the law of Florida. So, Sabrina, I imagine right now there's a lot of people who, like me, they go to the movie theaters, they see these movies where people take their case before a jury, especially an open and shut case like this. So right now, I bet our viewers are probably wondering, gosh, Sabrina, did a jury award you $20 million, $30 million? And so take us from the horrible loss of your father to what happened next in terms of the courts of Florida, and let these people know that there was no jury, there was no verdict, there was no payout. Not that you were looking for a payout, but people are probably thinking, wow, that's got to be a mega verdict.
Yeah, so one thing I just want to point out, because I mentioned the dates, October of 2020 was a tough year for all of us, right? With COVID. The vaccine was not out at this time. It came out December, January. So my dad had a history of blood clots. He served on a nuclear submarine. Okay. Why he had this history, I don't know. Was it related? I don't know. But this has absolutely nothing to do with the COVID vaccine. There was no chance my dad could ever receive it. It wasn't out yet.
Gotcha.
Second to that is I started calling attorneys on behalf of the autopsy doctor's recommendation, he told me that this doctor is a threat and you need to start calling people because this was very obvious. You know, your
And
dad definitely had a blood clot.
and Sabrina, just to be clear to our viewers, as a physician, uh, other physicians never say that. So when you have a person who ran the autopsy telling you this is a gross case of
Hmm.
malfeasance, I mean, Sabrina, you must have thought, wow, I can't believe this. This is such an event that I've got to do something.
Absolutely. I had so many thoughts. I mean, first of all, as a single mom, working and juggling everything to pay for an independent autopsy is not easy in the first place, right? But at that moment, and then to visualize your loved one going through all the procedures of an autopsy, if one can imagine, that's a secondary trauma for me, right? And so on top of that, now I have proof that it was preventable and what it was, and I'm being told that I absolutely need to do something about this doctor because he's a threat. So, to the best of my ability, I start contacting attorneys, and each one's asking me, was your dad married and how old are you? And I'm like, my parents get along if you need to talk to my mom, and I'm 30, and no one was really able to help me until the eighth attorney that I contacted. She said, can you come in? And I was like, someone's finally hearing me. Like,
Right.
maybe I've been saying it wrong. So I grab my son, I get all my evidence, the Department of Health, the ACA, all this stuff, and I go in, explain my story to her, and she listens. And she's like, well, Florida has this law. And I was like, no, please don't say it. And she said it. And she said, but you have a lot of energy and you need to put it where you can make a difference. And I said, well, how do I do that? Like, I'm not political, at the time, totally not involved in politics. And she said, you need to change this law. So I kind of took that advice. I left this office and I got to work. And it's because of her I felt like this is what I need to do.
And so to be absolutely clear, so everyone understands, there was no reckoning for this physician. There was no justice done in the case of Keith Davis. And Sabrina, you made reference to the fact that it was Florida law that kept there from being a reckoning day. And it's this thing that when I went to the Florida House, I got to be honest, it's a statute that I was very unfamiliar with. It's kind of colloquially known. I'm not sure if this helps the case or hurts it, but it's kind of known around Tallahassee as the free kill law. Would you mind explaining exactly what that law is that prevented you from seeking justice and prevented you from having closure? What is a free kill law and who does it apply to?
Sure. So, under Florida's Wrongful Death Act, if somebody is single, divorced, or widowed, and they have no child under the age of 25, then that person falls into a category where if they die of medical malpractice, like my dad did, then the family cannot pursue that same equal access to the courts for non economic damages like other families can. So
Mhm.
it takes
That is,
away a portion of our access to the courts, a very big portion.
oh, absolutely. For people that aren't familiar with this statute, we're talking about what they term, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sabrina, they call it non-economic damages. So you're talking
Right.
about pain and suffering. Uh, for most jury verdicts, that is a sizable part of the verdict. Because again, think of if you were in Sabrina's shoes. Think if you lived through this, right? You had to go through all these measures. Your father's no longer with you. To get justice, you had to do all these steps and all these measures. And they basically have a statute that said it's not worth anything. Keith Davis's life, because he didn't have a child under 25, his life had no value in a court of law. And it's just crazy to me, Sabrina, that this would even be on the books. And again, just so everyone understands, we're talking about medical malpractice, if I'm correct. It's wrongful death at the hands of a physician. Now, if you're in the middle of Publix and let's say they have a forklift or something that runs you over. Now, I believe you can sue Publix for non-economic damage. I think this is just a carve out for physicians. Am I right?
To my understanding, yes, this does not apply to automobile accidents. This does not apply to other slip and falls or etc. type claims that may present in a death where you sue the person at fault. This is only physicians, healthcare providers who commit medical malpractice and the loved one falls into this very narrow Florida only category that was created for single, divorced, or widowed people with no children under the age of 25. And I should mention that this also affects tourists in our state of Florida, which we are a big state for snowbirds and people like that. And if you're here and you seek help and you die and you're in that category, you are not going to be, your family is not going to be able to recover for non-economic damages.
That is just amazing. You know, we're proud of a lot of things in Florida, but that is certainly not one of them. I mean, when you think about it, Sabrina, in Florida, we've created an entire category of people who are treated differently under the law. Like I said, if someone harms my wife, I have recourse in a Florida court, right? But, you know, thinking about what you just said, I was driving home today getting ready for the interview, and it struck me for the first time in my life. I have an older sister that would be a potential victim under this law because she is over the age of 25. She's elderly. She has no husband, no surviving children under 25. So I wonder how many people right now at home could just sit and think there's probably someone in your family, maybe even in your immediate family, if you're watching this right now. Think of if there's anyone in your family who's unmarried, single, divorced, if they're over 25, and if they themselves don't have a survivor who's under 25. I mean, that's basically the gist of it, isn't it, Sabrina? That's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. It is. We may not realize how many people it is until we really start realizing about this law and thinking about who we know. And I am so sorry that your sister is in this category because it's a scary place to be.
Well, and I think it's important that we have people think of it in those terms, right? Because so often we're so busy in our daily lives that when something affects a percentage of the population, or like you say, you go to all these meetings in Tallahassee, you hear all these bills affecting other families and other counties, and it's real easy for us to say, well, that's not our problem. You know, that's not my problem. That doesn't affect me. People need to stop and think about what the free kill statute is, because I guarantee you, everyone watching this has someone that would be considered a free kill. And to be honest, Sabrina, you and the people around you, the people who have been victimized by this law, in my opinion, that's one of the strongest arguments that y'all would make. Back when I was in Tallahassee and you guys would visit the Capitol, you would walk around giving examples of what a free kill was. And I think that was probably your best ammunition, right? Because again, if you're a politician, if you're a legislator, you're thinking, well, hey, I'm above the law, or hey, that's them. That couldn't possibly affect me. It affects more people than you know. And actually, you know, I wanted to spend just a minute because you and I have known each other for a couple years now. I want to share a couple stories because I asked Sabrina to be on this program specifically to talk about the free kill law on Martin Luther King weekend, because in my opinion, this is an example of a civil rights violation. This is an example of Sabrina having to live her life and walk amongst people who have a certain right under the law. And when Sabrina goes home for the day, she has to look at her picture of her father and realize that she does not have the same rights as everyone else that she talked to in the course of the day. So I want to let people know, just to go all the way back to the beginning. So I first met Sabrina. I was a young legislator. I didn't know anything about the free kill law. I was actually on my way to Mass in Tallahassee. I'm a Catholic, and they have this big event at the Catholic Church there at the cathedral in Tallahassee where a lot of legislators go. So I'm there in the car with my wife, and we're driving by the cathedral looking for a parking place. and I see a bunch of protesters a block away from the church. And to be honest, it kind of was scary. I saw people who looked like they had like red writing on white shirts. And it almost looked like blood. And the signs that were being waved, it was in red font, big red letters. And again, it looked kind of like bloody font. So my wife and I pull over and we're thinking, oh God, those are probably like some of those radical abortion protesters or something. They might be out there with blood-stained shirts and whatnot. Man, this is not a good look. I put the wife in the church and I said, I'm going to go talk to those people because obviously something's on their mind. I mean, they're really passionate about something. Let me go see if this is an abortion protest or what. So I get out there. Lo and behold, these are normal citizens, people like Sabrina. In fact, that's where I first met Sabrina for the first time. And it wasn't blood, but again, these are victims. These are people who have lost loved ones. And they were standing on a corner in Tallahassee, waving posters, signs, banners, all because they heard there was a possibility that Governor Ron DeSantis might attend the Mass that day. So, ladies and gentlemen, these were people who were just simply trying to be heard. Sabrina, I would imagine that by that point, you guys had probably been rejected by a lot of people. A lot of legislators probably said, speak to the hand. I mean, it was probably a frustrating time, if judging from how things looked that afternoon.
Yeah, that was quite some time ago. I can't say I would do that again. By the way, my son and I were definitely not wearing one of those shirts, but I know what you're talking about. So, yeah, that was kind of when everyone worked closer together. I would say now a lot of people, a lot of advocates kind of work parallel. Just, you got to find what works for you. But sure, I remember when you stopped by, and to be quite honest, I don't think any of us believed you when you said come by your office the next day that you would talk to us, because we had heard that all day long, So you were one of the rare ones who actually kept your word, and you did talk to us the next day, and here you are today. And I wanted to comment on a point you made a few minutes ago. In life, such as anything, if it doesn't happen to us, you're right. Like, we don't really connect to it because it's not us, and we think it won't be us. But that could not be far from untrue, And so I agree with you. There's two types of people that go to Tallahassee to speak on this. Some are there to influence, and some are there to educate. There's a lot of people there to influence, and they do a wonderful job. When I go, I'm there to educate. And if I had one ask, it would just be for the governor to listen to some families. Rather than being influenced, he could also be educated. And we are here. I would love to speak with him. I am open to that conversation. And, I hope one day that he feels like he's ready to have it.
Well, and it's interesting because, as you said, I went out there and it was obvious that you guys had a story to tell. And I was unaware of it. I think most new legislators who get elected do not know about this statute. And so because I didn't think you could educate me in 2 minutes on a street corner, I did. I invited all the members there, all the protesters, to come to my office. Sabrina did the next morning. And as she said, ladies and gentlemen, they educated me. They told me about this statute that you wouldn't know about unless you were personally affected. They told me about how it affected them. And, Sabrina, that brings us to another point. There has been, of course, opposition to repealing this horrible statute, mostly from physicians, mostly from hospitals. It's seen as, well, hey, you're kind of opening the floodgates, and, you're opening us to the possibility of more lawsuits. And, in my own case, I remember I had an incident back in 2023 that I'm not particularly proud of, but you can find it on YouTube. There was a reporter from Tampa who was talking to both of us saying, well, boy, this is a no-brainer. You'd have to be an idiot to oppose this. And I told her, I said, no, you've got to recognize that there is another side to this. I don't agree with them, but there is another side to this, and it involves education. And I don't think people appreciate the fact that there are physicians in the state of Florida that are being sued left and right. Now, I would say more in South Florida than North Florida. But guys, again, we're not talking about frivolous lawsuits. We're not talking about giving Sabrina a right that no one else has. What the state of Florida is talking about, they're talking about denying Sabrina the same right that I have. And, one incident that I am proud of this last session, last year, what was it, 2025? I was proud, even though I wasn't in the legislature anymore, I was proud of the fact that I did come back and testify in favor of the repeal. I spoke up in Sabrina's defense and said, guys, this statute's got to go. Again, the only doctors you're protecting with this statute are bad doctors. You'll get people from the Florida Medical Association. You'll get people who I know personally. You'll get good doctors who will stand up and defend this horrible piece of statute. And again, I don't know what they're worried about. They are not bad doctors. We are not exposing them to frivolous lawsuits. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, Sabrina, there's a doctor up here in Destin, Florida, a couple years ago who made the news. He removed a patient's liver when he thought it was their spleen. We understand after an investigation opened, we understand that wasn't the first case of him operating on the wrong organ. Now, if that were your father, if that were your mother, if that were my sister, who's a free kill, I wouldn't want to hold that doctor accountable. So again, there has been opposition, but I believe it's because they're poorly educated. They're not informed on what this law means. And I want to give you a couple minutes just to talk about the opposition, because you've been going to Tallahassee since what year?
So my dad died in 2020, the end of that year. My first year was 2022, and I've been going ever since. So 5 years.
Fantastic. And in my opinion, the closest we got to passage was last session. Again, I wasn't in the legislature. I had talked to the appropriate parties. I was actually going to run that bill had I stayed. Instead, I ran for Congress. And so I came back to testify on behalf of the bill. And we were getting yes votes left and right. Like I said, it passed the House, it passed the Senate, and it made it to the governor's desk. What kind of problems are you running into this session? Because obviously last session, there was a lot of friction. When it did reach the governor's desk last session, he vetoed it. There was no override forthcoming. What has been the response this session?
Sure. So you're right. The governor did veto it, but it did pass the legislature, which was an honor. It was history, and I think that really shows that our legislators are seeing the importance of this really good bill. Unfortunately, yes, the governor did veto it. There were some things that he said that probably could have been said differently or not at all, such as like this is jackpot justice or it's like winning the lottery. I can tell you firsthand, as someone who's experienced this, I'd rather have my dad than be doing any of this right now. My dad fought for the freedom of this country, and I guess here I am fighting for the same freedom of equal access to the courts. So, I remain hopeful. As far as opposition goes, sure, just like we have our points to make because it's personal and it's happened to us, they too have their points to make. So I actually find stronger conversation in, communicating with opposition. I welcome those conversations because I think that is what it's going to take for us to ever reach a consensus to repeal this law. If we live our lives thinking that we are always right and we have to win and it has to be our way or no way, that's not a way to be successful, in my opinion. So as far as opposition goes, I am always here to listen. I am always here to take those thoughts that someone else may have and put them into my own thinking. It doesn't mean that we have to agree. We can agree to disagree in a respectful way. But I do find that, communicating with everyone involved is so important, and it's probably the only way that we will get this done.
Well, and Sabrina, I just want you to know that if they don't agree with you. Like I said, we can agree to disagree, but they are legally not standing on a solid ground. There's no way that in good conscience, I don't care who you are. I don't care what kind of physician you are. I don't care what kind of pressure you're under. There's no way that you can look in the mirror and say, hey, I harmed this family. I harmed this person. And you know what? I'm happy that I got away with it, or I'm happy that there's not going to be anything coming of it. I mean, that's not a stance. We talk about history a lot in Tallahassee. That's being on the wrong side of history. There's no way I would want to be an FMA representative saying that, yeah, I want to stand for physicians that harm patients. That's just not that, history is going to bear out that those people were mistaken. And in my opinion, I think it's just a matter of time until you and all the other affected families in Florida get the justice they deserve. Can I give you one quick opinion, and then I'll let you have the last word? Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
So my opinion for this session, last session, in my honest opinion, I think the legislation was doomed from the start. I didn't realize it then. But as the session drew out, you probably realize now in hindsight, boy, there was a massive civil war going on in the Florida legislature last year. You had the Florida House in open defiance of Governor Ron DeSantis, and just outright, investigating the governor, throwing frivolous claims at the governor. So there was a lot of bad blood last year, right? And as someone who's been in the Florida House for 2 years, right, you always want to keep your aces up your sleeve. You always want to have a card to play. So when the time came to convince the governor, and we had to say, well, Governor, the people who have been fighting you tooth and nail, they're for this bill. I think it was very hard for the governor to listen to reason at that point. I also think, there's a reason we have veto overrides, correct? I mean, sometimes the governor doesn't like something and we pass it anyway. Well, I think in that toxic environment last year, I'm sure, Sabrina, you were like me. I was praying for an override. The override never came. The two sides, House and Senate, never even got together to discuss an override. And again, I believe it was due to the toxic environment created by the Florida House. And it wasn't toxic about this bill. This bill was almost unanimous. It was toxicity created about other things, right? About immigration, about property taxes, all kind of, taking authority away from the governor. So my hope, Sabrina, my hope is that toxic environment has dissipated. My hope, even though we haven't seen evidence of it this session, my hope is that the House and the governor's office have somewhat made up. My hope is that people like you, or people that you and I both trust in the Florida House, can get an audience with the governor and explain to him how this is not jackpot justice. So again, I'm a hopeful person. I hope that those bridges have been repaired and mended. And if not, I hope the bridges between the House and Senate have been mended in such a way that maybe this is the year we can get a veto override if necessary. And again, look, I respect Governor DeSantis's opinion either way. Not everyone's going to agree on this topic. But as a physician, I can tell you, just like I told the Florida House, do not think you're giving me a favor with this statute. You're not protecting me. You're protecting bad doctors, like the doctor who treated Keith Davis, like the doctor in Destin, Florida, who took out a liver instead of a spleen. We do not need to be protecting bad doctors in the state of Florida. As I told the Florida House, if those doctors want to leave Florida, bye. Now, Sabrina, I want to give you the last word because, again, I'm praying that this is the year that you will have justice served one way or the other. Take us out, Sabrina.
Well, thank you. I truly appreciate all that you have to say. It means a lot. And, I'm not sure where the House and the Senate stand as far as their negotiations or where the House is at with the governor. I personally don't know the answers to those questions. But I would hope that at the end of the day, that they can all come to do the right thing for families and what the people are asking. I don't want our loved ones' stories to be used as a bargain chip or that ace up the sleeve type strategy, although it's very possible. I don't know. But ultimately, I hope that they can find that they look at this and say, what is the right thing to do? And you know what? If medical malpractice is so bad in Florida, let's reduce medical malpractice cases. How do we do that? How do we strengthen our system? Strong systems do not fear scrutiny, they welcome it. It's how you get better. You can't always run from something and expect a better outcome. So for me, I'm hopeful because I do believe by repealing this law that it will allow for better health care. As children, we're taught consequences if we do something bad. And in my dad's case, the doctor received a $7,500 fine in education classes. Is that really enough? That cost about as much as the autopsy did. So, who's really being protected here? It's blanket immunity. It's providing sanctuary to bad medicine. And I know that Florida is so much better than that. We need to build medical integrity. We need to build trust. And we need to build that accountability. And we need to reduce our lawsuits, but not at the expense of taking the rights away from some people. So I think I will leave it at that. I'm very thankful for the bill passing the House. I'm honored to have our amazing sponsors this session and our co-sponsors. And I look forward to the bill in the Senate moving as well.
Sabrina Davis, I want to let you know that you've waited a long time. Hopefully this is the year that your father receives justice. Hopefully this is the year that free kill is no more in the state of Florida. We'll be waiting. We'll be watching and waiting. And, again, on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, on a weekend when we're supposed to respect the decency and the integrity and the value of every human life, every human has inalienable rights to know that your father and many hundreds of thousands of other Floridians' rights are being taken away from them, and they're not even aware of it. This must change. Thank you so much for joining us, Sabrina, on this fantastic weekend.
Thank you.
So that's it for today's podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed our look around Selma, Alabama, and thank you to Sabrina Davis for the interview. Best wishes to Sabrina and the thousands of Floridians across the state that are adversely affected by this horrible free kill legislation. I thought it was appropriate to discuss this on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend because can you imagine what it's like to not have the same rights in a court of law as every other person in the state of Florida? I can't imagine what Sabrina's going through. But folks, that's it for the podcast. I'm not really sure when the next one's going to be. I try to churn one out every weekend, but it's kind of up in the air this week. Sophie, do you want to? My wife Sophie's here. I don't know if maybe she would want to maybe tell you guys what's on our calendar for this week. Mm-hmm. Sophie, come up here and let the folks know kind of if you want to tell them what's going on.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to go in for surgery on Tuesday for a lumpectomy. I had an abnormal mammogram. The biopsy came back positive, but they've caught it early, so that's good. And hopefully there's no surprises on Tuesday. But I just want to thank everybody on Joel's Facebook page for praying for me. I know I see all your comments and prayers, and I really, really appreciate it. It's nice to know you guys are out there praying for me, even if I don't know you. I appreciate it.
So breast cancer sucks, and it's not just for women. Peter Criss, the drummer from Kiss, he also had breast cancer. I don't know if you were aware of that. So yeah, we're gonna be busy. Mm-hmm. Again, thank you for your thoughts and prayers at this time. You guys are unbelievable. But, it was my honor and privilege to fight for you guys in Tallahassee. And hopefully you don't mind offering up a couple prayers for my wife as she goes through this next part of what's to be expected. So, Sophie, mm-hmm. We'll sign off for now and hopefully see you guys next week.
Thank you.